Welcome to our deep dive, and today we're going to be looking at Blood Meridian. But we're not just tackling the text itself, you've actually given us quite the challenge here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at it through the lens of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy.
Interesting.
Yeah, and get this.
Okay.
We're focusing on Judge Holden, that unforgettable, just enigmatic figure
Mm-hmm.
as a potential Nietzschean Superman.
Oh, wow.
Pretty heady stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely a thought-provoking approach for sure. You see, Nietzsche himself, I mean, he's often simplified,
Yeah.
even misrepresented. Some might hear Superman and think of, comic books.
Yeah.
But his ideas are so much richer and more complex than that.
Exactly. So for our deep dive today, let's give our listener a little Nietzsche 101. Okay, so he was this 19th century German philosopher who really shook things up. He questioned traditional morality and organized religion and things like that, really going against the grain. And some of his key ideas that we'll see reflected in Blood Meridian are this tension between order and chaos, which he called Apollonian and Dionysian.
Right.
The idea that we as individuals, we create our own values, and this really wild concept of the eternal return.
Right. Yeah, and looking at Blood Meridian through this philosophical lens is particularly intriguing because, I mean, the book itself is known for its brutality and the way it forces us to confront, like, these dark aspects of human nature. So I think by applying Nietzsche's ideas, we can maybe gain a deeper understanding of Judge Holden's motivations, his, pronouncements, and maybe even that unsettling power that he seems to wield over everyone else.
Now, the material you provided draws a fascinating parallel between Judge Holden and Zarathustra, the central figure in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Right.
And both characters seem to advocate for this idea of a dance of war, rejecting those traditional moral boundaries and embracing a more primal, instinctual way of life.
Right.
But there's a crucial difference here, right? So how do you see this dance of war playing out for each character?
It's a great observation.
Mm-hmm.
And the distinction is really key, I think, to understanding them. For Zarathustra, this dance of war is more metaphorical.
Okay.
It's a clash of ideas, a rebellion against societal norms. But Holden's dance is terrifyingly literal,
Yeah.
It manifests as violence, bloodshed, a complete disregard for human life. He embodies the concept in its most brutal form.
And it's not just his actions, but his words, too. I mean, some of the things that he says are just bone-chilling. For example, he claims that moral law is an invention of mankind for the disenfranchisement of the powerful in favor of the weak.
Oh, wow.
So how should we interpret statements like these within the framework of Nietzsche's philosophy?
Well, I think that's where it gets really interesting. Holden takes these philosophical concepts and he kind of twists them,
Okay.
using them to justify his own actions and also to manipulate those around him.
Right.
And this idea of placing himself above conventional morality, of acting as a sort of godlike figure, it's a fascinating and disturbing distortion of Nietzsche's ideas.
Yeah.
It's as if he's taken these concepts of self-determination and turned them into a tool for absolute control.
And speaking of control, there's another Nietzschean concept that seems to be at play here, and that's the eternal return,
Right.
It's this idea that time is cyclical, not linear. So what are the implications of this concept in relation to the judge's character and the overall atmosphere of Blood Meridian?
Well, the eternal return is a complex and often misunderstood aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy.
Yeah.
It's not just about time repeating itself, but about like a shift in perspective and acceptance of the present moment as all that truly exists.
Mm-hmm.
Now, apply that to Judge Holden. He's described as ageless, almost mythical.
Mm-hmm.
There are even hints that some characters might have encountered him before, as if he exists outside of time itself.
So he almost embodies this idea of the eternal return,
Right.
making him seem even more godlike and powerful.
Exactly. And by embracing this concept, by rejecting the idea of, linear time and consequences, the judge creates his own reality.
Yeah.
A reality where he can act with complete impunity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what are consequences if everything is just going to repeat anyway?
It's unsettling, but it makes a strange kind of sense. And this idea plays out in some really specific, vivid scenes in the book. Take that wild party in Chihuahua, for example. It starts as this joyous celebration, a release of energy, but then, just as the judge seems to orchestrate it, it descends into violence and destruction.
Yeah, it's a prime example of what we were talking about earlier, that twisted version of Nietzsche's Dionysian release.
Right.
You have this raw, primal energy unleashed, but with like absolutely no moral compass guiding it.
Yeah.
And it's not just a random act of chaos.
Right.
It feels purposeful, almost ritualistic.
Right, and we see similar patterns in other scenes like that funeral procession in Nakori, where a simple act of mourning explodes into a brutal brawl and the judge casually executes a wounded man as if it's nothing. Or how about the escalating chaos in Tucson, with Holden himself picking up a fiddle and leading his men in a frenzied dance as the city literally burns around them.
It's as if he's using music, something that should be unifying, something that should bring people together, as a trigger for violence.
Right.
These moments that should be filled with like shared humanity are twisted into these bloodbaths. It's showcasing the judge's terrifying power over the group's primal instincts. But while the judge embodies this chaotic energy, there's another character who offers a stark contrast, and that's the kid.
The kid is an interesting one. The material you sent describes him as a last man figure, and which, if I remember correctly, is one of Nietzsche's harshest critiques of modern society.
It is. He viewed the last man as lacking ambition and drive, content to simply follow the crowd and avoid any kind of real confrontation.
Yeah.
Essentially someone who's given up on striving for anything greater.
And the kid does seem to fit that description, at least at first. He doesn't actively try to lead or challenge the judge's authority. In fact, he often appears reluctant to engage in the violence that surrounds him. And there's that scene where he helps David Brown remove an arrow from his leg, even though it could be seen as a sign of weakness by the others. So what does this act of compassion tell us about the kid and how he fits into this Nietzschean framework?
That act of compassion, I think, is incredibly significant. I mean, it really sets the kid apart from the rest of the gang, especially the judge who, thrives on that brutality and dominance.
Yeah.
And remember, Nietzsche saw the last man as someone who values comfort and security above all else, even if it means sacrificing, their individuality and integrity. Right. So in a way, the kid's willingness to help David Brown, despite the risk to himself, demonstrates a rejection of that kind of passive acceptance of the status quo.
Right.
He's not actively challenging the judge's authority, but he's also not blindly conforming to it.
That's a really interesting point. It's like he's carving out his own path within this chaotic landscape.
Yeah.
Even if it's a path of quiet resistance rather than outright rebellion.
Right.
But there's another side to the kid too.
The
source material points out how he's fascinated by the judge's knowledge.
Okay.
He observes the judge's meticulous documentation of the natural world. His obsession with understanding and controlling every aspect of his surroundings. So is there a connection between this fascination and the kid's last man characteristics?
It's a great question, and it speaks to the complex dynamic, I think, between those two characters. The kid, despite his reluctance to engage in the same level of violence as the judge, is drawn to the judge's intellect. He sees the power that knowledge can bring, perhaps even recognizing its potential for both good and evil.
Yeah.
But unlike the judge who, seeks to dominate and control, the kid seems more content to observe and learn.
Okay.
He's almost like a student trying to decipher the enigma that is Judge Holden.
But the judge doesn't seem to want a student, does he?
Right.
He seems to view any kind of independent thinking as a threat. Remember, the judge famously says, whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. Okay. So he's driven by this insatiable need to catalog, to categorize, to possess knowledge as a form of power.
Exactly. The judge wants to impose order on a world that he sees as inherently chaotic.
Yeah.
And the kid, with his quiet observations and independent actions, represents a challenge to that worldview.
Right.
It's as though he's saying there's another way to exist in this world, a way that doesn't require, dominance and control.
And that tension between those two perspectives really comes to a head in the book's ambiguous ending.
Yeah.
We're left with that chilling image of the judge waiting for the kid in the outhouse. Mm-hmm. And we don't know for sure what happens next.
Right.
But the implication is clear, right?
Yeah.
The kid, despite his passive resistance, doesn't stand a chance against the judge's overwhelming force.
It's a deeply unsettling conclusion,
Yeah.
and it leaves us with, a lot of unanswered questions.
Right.
Does the kid's ultimate fate suggest that silent resistance is futile in the face of overwhelming power? Or is there a deeper meaning to a sacrifice?
It's almost as though McCarthy is forcing us to confront the harsh realities of a world where violence and ruthlessness often prevail.
Yeah.
So is there any hope in a world ruled by people like Judge Holden?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Blood Meridian doesn't offer, easy answers,
Hmm.
but it does challenge us to examine, our own values, our own responses to the darkness that exists both within ourselves and the world around us.
We've talked a lot about the judge and the kid, but I'm curious to hear more about your thoughts on the role of the landscape in the novel. The setting itself is almost a character, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You have these vast, desolate deserts, these moments of stark beauty, but always with this undercurrent of menace and violence. So how does this setting contribute to the overall themes of the book?
Well, the landscape is absolutely crucial to understanding Blood Meridian, I think. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not just a backdrop for the action.
Yeah.
It's a reflection of the internal struggles of the characters.
Yeah.
That constant tension between order and chaos, between the Apollonian and Dionysian that we discussed earlier, is mirrored in the environment itself.
Yeah.
Think about the way McCarthy describes the desert, the harsh sun, the unforgiving terrain, the constant threat of death lurking just beneath the surface.
And the way the characters move through this landscape is interesting too. They're constantly on the move, searching for something, whether it's gold, knowledge, or just a sense of purpose. But their journey is never easy.
Right.
It's a brutal, unforgiving test of their physical and mental limits.
Exactly. And the landscape itself seems to resist their attempts to control it.
Yeah.
The judge might try to impose his order through his, meticulous observations and classifications, but nature always finds a way to disrupt his plans.
It's like the desert represents this primal force that cannot be fully tamed, no matter how much knowledge or power one might possess.
That's a brilliant insight, and I think it speaks to the book's overall message. Blood Meridian isn't just a story about violence and bloodshed.
Right.
It's a meditation on the limits of human ambition, the futility of trying to impose order on a world that is inherently chaotic.
So where does that leave us then? If even someone as intelligent and ruthless as Judge Holden can't conquer nature, what hope is there for the rest of us?
It's a bleak outlook, to be sure, but I think Blood Meridian isn't necessarily trying to offer a message of despair. It's more about forcing us to confront these uncomfortable truths,
Yeah.
to acknowledge the darkness that exists in the world and within ourselves. Perhaps by facing these truths, we can find a way to navigate them, to carve out our own path, even in the face of overwhelming chaos.
And maybe that's where the kid comes in.
Yeah.
Even though he ultimately succumbs to the judge's violence, his quiet resistance, his moments of compassion offer a glimmer of hope. It's as if he's showing us that even in the darkest of times, there's still the possibility of choosing a different path.
I love that interpretation.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even in a world ruled by the judges of the world, we still have a choice in how we respond to the chaos around us. We can choose to embrace the darkness, to become part of the dance of war, or we can choose to resist, to find our own meaning, our own way of being in the world, even if it means, standing alone.
But that raises another question, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean to stand alone in a world like the one depicted in Blood Meridian?
Yeah.
Is it an act of defiance, or is it simply a path to self-destruction?
That's a question I think each reader has to answer for themselves. And I think that's part of what makes Blood Meridian such a powerful and enduring work of literature. It doesn't give us easy answers. It challenges us to wrestle with these complex questions, to confront the darkness and search for our own meaning in a world that often seems meaningless.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with one final thought.
Okay.
Think back to the judge's obsession with knowledge, with controlling the natural world. We've talked about how the landscape resists his attempts at dominance, how it ultimately remains a force beyond his grasp. But what about us?
Right.
What about us as readers? Can we truly understand and interpret a text as complex and challenging as Blood Meridian?
That's a fascinating question, and I think it's at the heart of what makes literature so powerful.
Yeah.
We our own experiences, our own perspectives to the text, and in turn, the text challenges us.
Yeah.
Forces us to confront our own assumptions and beliefs.
And maybe that's where the real dance of war takes place, not on the battlefields of the American West, but within ourselves. It's like we're engaging in our own, dance of war with the text, right?
Yeah.
Trying to wrestle it into submission, to extract some kind of definitive meaning. But maybe the beauty of Blood Meridian and literature in general is that it resists those easy answers.
Right.
It forces us to keep questioning, keep grappling, keep dancing.
Precisely. And just as the landscape in the novel defies the judge's attempts at control, the text itself resists any singular interpretation.
Right.
It remains open to multiple readings, multiple perspectives, and that's what makes it, so endlessly fascinating.
It makes you realize that the dance of war isn't just about violence or dominance. It's about the struggle to make sense of the world, to find meaning in the face of chaos and uncertainty. And maybe that struggle is never truly over.
That's a profound point, and perhaps that's the ultimate legacy of Blood Meridian. It leaves us with more questions than answers,
Right. Yeah.
more doubts than certainties. But in doing so, it sparks a fire in our minds. A desire to keep searching, keep exploring, keep dancing with the text, even if the dance never truly ends.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Blood Meridian through this Nietzschean lens, I want to thank you for joining us on this journey.
Oh, of course.
It's been quite a ride, hasn't it?
It certainly has, and I hope it's inspired you to revisit the text with fresh eyes, to consider the ways in which Nietzsche's ideas can illuminate the dark corners of McCarthy's masterpiece.
And for you listening, we leave you with this. Blood Meridian is a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it. It challenges you, it provokes you, and ultimately it forces you to confront the deepest questions about humanity, about violence, about the search for meaning in a world that often seems meaningless.
Yeah.
So go back to the text, keep those questions in mind, and see what new insights you uncover. Who knows? You might even find yourself dancing with the judge and the kid long after the final page is turned.
That's a great point.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.